The courtroom dropped into a suffocating silence the instant the doors swung open, and Daniel Walker stepped across the threshold. Each step of his boots rang out against the polished floor, sharp and deliberate, like the march of a soldier returning to a battlefield he thought he had left behind. His shoulders were taut, his gaze steady yet hollow, and gleaming against his chest was the Medal of Honor gold catching the light, a quiet testament to sacrifices no one here could truly fathom. Today, he was not a hero. Today, he was a father, fighting for the one thing that had kept him going long after the war. The daughter he loved more than life itself. If you believe in mercy, second chances, and looking past scars to see the heart beneath, like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support lets these stories reach more souls who need them. Daniel felt the weight of the crowd pressing down on him. Families who had lost loved ones clutched framed photos tightly to their chests, their grief heavy and palpable. He understood their pain. He truly did. But today, that grief had a target, and it was him. They blamed Daniel for a rescue mission gone wrong 3 years ago. Mission where he had saved 12 soldiers but could not save one mother's son sitting silently in the front row. They did not know the full story. He had never spoken a word in his defense, believing that some truths were sacred, and some debts owed to fallen comrades were too heavy to share. But now, that silence worked against him. The judge's gaze was sharp, cold, and unyielding, as if the medal on Daniel's chest were a provocation. Daniel stood at attention, not from respect, but because the room's intensity left him no choice. Daniel's stance was carved from muscle memory, forged by years of living under orders. His hands remained clasped behind him, just as he had been taught, though every nerve in his body trembled with the fear of losing his 8-year-old daughter. Lily, she sat quietly in the second row, tiny hands wrapped around the stuffed toy he had carried across deserts, barracks, and sleepless nights, always keeping her close in spirit. She didn't understand why the world seemed so angry at her dad. All she knew was that he was the safest place she had ever been. When the judge commanded Daniel to remove his Medal of Honor, calling it a distraction, a ripple of murmurs spread through the courtroom. To him, it was like being asked to erase the memory of the brothers he had lost, the promises he had made, and the nights haunted by the sound of distant explosions under a desert sky. Yet Daniel said nothing. Slowly, reverently, he reached for the ribbon, fingers shaking as if touching something sacred. That medal had been pinned on him while the world applauded, but, in his heart, it belonged to the men who never returned. He hesitated not, out of pride, but because letting go felt like leaving behind the last piece of them he could still carry publicly. He knew that if he removed it, some would see it as a silent confession of guilt, others as a signal that he was no longer worthy. And still, the judge's eyes bored into him, rigid and impatient, demanding compliance. Before his fingers could unfasten the clasp, the courtroom door creaked open. A collective intake of breaths swept the room. Heads turned, whispers rippling like a gathering storm. There, framed in the doorway, stood a woman in full white naval uniform. Her posture was impeccable, her gaze fierce and controlled, radiating authority that even made the judge sit straighter. Rows of ribbons gleamed across her chest, and her presence seemed to draw the room into stillness. She stepped forward with calm, deliberate purpose, every movement echoing the weight of experience and the promise of confrontation. Her presence radiated unmistakable authority. Her eyes swept the room, landing first on Daniel, glancing briefly at his daughter, and then locking onto the judge. Without a single word, Her stance spoke louder than any testimony could. Something was about to change, and the air itself seemed to hold its breath. The Admiral had known Daniel long before the medals and headlines. She knew the mission the court was now twisting against him. She understood the sacrifices he had made, and the secret he had carried to protect another family from a truth too heavy to bear. Walking directly to Daniel, she positioned herself at his side, a shield of quiet strength he had never asked for but desperately needed. When she turned to face the judge, the room felt the shift. Witnesses later said, the judge's rigid authority wavered for the first time that day. The Admiral's voice cut through the tension like steel through ice. Though her words were not fully quoted, the weight of her message shattered assumptions. She brought with her sealed evidence, classified details from military command, revealing what Daniel had never dared to speak. The fallen soldier, the one whose family blamed Daniel, had made a dying request. He had asked Daniel to save the others, not him. That whispered command, carried through blood and dust, had stayed with Daniel silently for years. The truth hidden from the grieving mother. Her son had chosen self-sacrifice to protect his team. As the revelation hit, the courtroom seemed to collapse inward. Photos pressed to grieving chests quivered in trembling hands. Eyes that had held nothing but anger now brimmed with tears. Even the judge faltered, looking at Daniel not as an accused, but as a man who had borne a burden no one should ever face alone. Lily, confused by the sudden change, clutched her father's leg tighter, sensing the shift but not yet understanding its depth. The Admiral placed her hand lightly on Daniel's shoulder, not in comfort, but as a quiet acknowledgement of the courage it took to stay silent for the sake of honor. She made one last, unwavering statement to the judge, standing tall, her voice carrying the weight of generations of service. Whatever she said, it was enough. The judge lowered her gaze in shame, withdrawing the demand that Daniel remove his medal. The courtroom, once burning with accusation, softened into something fragile. A delicate mix of respect, regret, and a dawning understanding of true sacrifice filled the air. Daniel did not collapse, though everyone expected him to. Instead, he closed his eyes and breathed deeply, a long, trembling breath he hadn't allowed himself in years. Lily pressed herself against him, arms wrapped tight, whispering, "I know you're a good dad. The best dad." And for the first time in what felt like forever, Daniel let himself believe her. If this story touched your heart, like, share, and subscribe. Send hope to someone who needs it today. And before the last moment fades, comment below which part of this story moved you the most. As the courtroom slowly emptied, the gavel echoed not as an ending, but as a beginning. Daniel stood tall not because of the medal on his chest, but because the truth he had carried alone was finally free. The Admiral saluted silently, and he returned it, a look of gratitude passing between them that only warriors could understand. For the first time since the battlefield, Daniel Walker walked out, not as a wounded veteran, not as a man burdened by blame that wasn't his, but as a father stepping into the light. The weight lifted, the silence broken, and a long overdue peace settling in his chest.